Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C., where I serve as the Partnership and Innovation Specialist for the Small Business Innovation Program, Research Program, or SBIR for short. This is a U.S. government seed program that invests in entrepreneurial small businesses to develop game changing technologies. Welcome to the 8th annual Ed Games Expo, a week long showcase of ed tech innovations that were developed with the support of programs across the federal government. As part of this year's expo, 5 of the country's leading education technology developers have produced a How the Learning Game Was Made video to share the story of all the steps and roles that it takes to create a great learning game, from the concept ideation to wireframe and full scale development, all the way to the public release. We hope these events inform and inspire students to think of roles they would like to play and to connect the experience to their classroom learning and to future careers that they could one day play. Today's How the Learning Game Was Made video features Aztec Games, which was developed with support of the SBIR program at the United States Department of Agriculture, where I previously worked. Seventh Generation Games is a video game studio making immersive educational games and interactive apps with a mission of breaking down barriers to succeed, one math problem at a time. Aimed at grades 3 through 8, the games teach math, history, and language arts in English, Spanish, and indigenous languages. After the video ends, stay tuned for an engaging Q&A that I will moderate with 7th Generation Games CEO Maria Burns Ortiz and a group of middle school students from across the country who have not only watched the video, but have been collaborating with 7th Generation Games team on ideas for the next chapter of the Aztec Games series. Now off to Maria in Minneapolis, Minnesota to learn about how Aztec Games was made.
You seem confused, uncertain as to why you're here.
No, not confused. Just thinking of how to start.
You're trying to figure out how we got here.
That's a good way to put it. That is, trying to figure out how to explain how we went from nothing but an idea to the point we're at now, which is having created these games played by tens of thousands of kids.
Yes, good. Now we have somewhere to start from. But where does our story begin?
Well, in Aztec, the story begins, your teacher tells you whatever you do not touch this book. And so you do the only logical thing the minute he steps out of the room, you touch the book, which transports you from a Midwestern classroom into the heart of the Mayan jungle, where you will need to acquire knowledge of math and history if you ever hope to make it back to the 21st century. And so begins Aztec Games, a bilingual educational video game series made by us. How that came to be is an adventure all its own. I'm Maria Burns Ortiz, CEO and co-founder of 7th Generation Games, makers of Aztec Games, among many others. And here's our story of how the game was made. But it's not only my story to tell, which is why I asked these folks, who you'll meet soon, to help me out. Aztec was a game we'd wanted to make early on, meaning specifically an English-Spanish bilingual game teaching math. But to do that, we needed 2 things. The first was a concept, which is a rough idea of what your game is going to be about, and the second, more important part was money, because making games costs money. Some people told us they didn't like our idea, but the U.S. Department of Agriculture gave us a grant to make the first games in the Aztec Games series, as did some investors, who are people who give you money to build a company, and we ran a successful Kickstarter. Once we had the money, the first thing we did was bring together our narrative and teacher teams to help come up with a storyline that would be entertaining and educational. We started brainstorming ideas with these giant Post-its up around a room, writing things like possible activities for the games, era we'd focus on. My favorite sheet was other things kids like, because if it's not a fun game, who wants to play it? It was through that meeting we decided to build a game where you're pulled through time and you find yourself first in the Mayan Empire.
Can we discuss for a minute the fact that we've been taking the Mayan jungle?
I'm not ready for that conversation.
At which point we, my co-founder and 7th Generation Games president and senior developer, Anne Maria, had a great idea.
We were going to make a game called Meet the Maya. We thought we should start by going to actually meet the Maya. So that's what we did. We got on a plane and we flew to Belize. And then from Belize City, we drove for hours And then we got to Belmont Pond, and in Belmont Pond, we drove on some dirt rutted roads.
Remember we were on that ferry where we drove the car onto a boat and they had to turn this crank by hand to get us across the river?
It was pretty awesome. We literally went and met some people who were Maya, went horseback riding through the jungle.
Riding a horse in the jungle with Anne Maria back there somewhere.
We also went and climbed some of the Mayan pyramids.
It's one thing to Google and go to the library and do archival research, all things we did as well. But there's something to be said for standing atop these incredible pyramids, looking out over the vastness of what was the Mayan Empire. And we had a guide who was an archaeologist who was able to help us put what we were seeing into context and understand that history.
It was an archaeologist who actually was Maya, because sometimes we get history of someone who is looking at it completely from the outside. They don't have all of those stories. We look out at this jungle and it used to be just nothing because that was the first environmental sort of catastrophe that they cut down all the trees. And somebody who is actually from that people, often they have an additional perspective that perhaps someone outside of there wouldn't have.
So we came back to the US and it was time to get to work, which at that point involves diving into all aspects of design, right? Fleshing out the narrative, what the gameplay was going to be, what the artwork should look like, starting with what only existed as ideas and taking the steps to turn them into a game. And then I went to Stefan, our lead artist, with a ton of research and photos and stories and a list of artwork ideas we needed.
I love the way you guys handed me the information. I didn't have to do a ton of research. Oftentimes when I get specific tasks that require research, I spend more time researching than I do actually creating the art. So it's kind of this learning process. You guys were able to hand me a lot of really amazing information. And not only that, you were very specific in what you wanted to see. You know, don't get me wrong, I went out and I did do some research and collected images and made sure the timelines were correct and whatnot. But it didn't feel like I was, trapped in some library for a month trying to figure out what is it they want exactly.
And then you also have to make them engaging for a game, right? How do you do that?
Finding that brightness and action and just visually, it has to be something that captivates young people.
You mentioned brightness. Color is another area where you have reference materials, but at the same time, we're talking about over 1,000 years ago. And there's certainly gaps in the visuals that you as an artist have to fill. What is that like?
Just filling in gaps. So I'm trying to create dozens of characters in the scene, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like why does this guy have like a feather this tall? Then why is this guy wearing this outfit? Me filling in that was very interesting, a lot of fun, and it'll keep you on your toes.
Artwork in hand, or at least in process, it becomes Diana's show. Diana, you're a project manager, a job a lot of people probably don't even know about, but one of the most important positions in a video game studio, because you're the person who's responsible for making sure all of the parts and pieces come together on time. What is that like?
Specifically on the Aztec game series was just taking all the different parts, everything from the creative team, like aesthetics and the actual animation, sounds, stuff like that, getting it to the developers and making sure that it's right as, like I said, the creative team wants it on the pages so that we have, this Aztec game series rollout.
For Aztec, we called you in on everything.
I think it was the first time for me being on both ends of like making sure all of this gets together and like the project manager side, but then also being behind being like in the, I would say like the development side as well. I took on voice recording. I picked up some skills from our artist at that time when she was creating things. I picked up some coding from the developer that was mainly like the lead developer on the project. So it was interesting being able to see all of the different aspects of it, not only just like, well, here's this, here's that, and piece it all together, but actually being a part of that process as well. So recording a voiceover.
Llegamos al escritorio del señor González y allí fue cuando toqué el libro.
inputting some of the Spanish translation in the actual code and pushing that to all of the other developers. It was a really interesting experience, especially since it wasn't only just English, it was Spanish. It was both sides of it.
You led into one of the things that was such an important part of this project to so many of us, which is that it is bilingual.
Welcome to the Mayan Empire. Bienvenidos al Imperio Maya.
We took what is already challenging, which is making a video game, and then to make it educational on top of that, and to make it bilingual on top of that. But I know it was something that we all felt really strongly about.
For me, it was really cool in that I was able to use more of my Spanish. I learned Spanish from my parents at home, so it was very informal. It was picking up the academic terms about like, oh, how do you say, dividend in Spanish?
And you unexpectedly became our Spanish audio engineer on Aztec.
I remember I was like, oh, that's not supposed to be in there. I messed up on that. But our sound editor did get up because he didn't understand the Spanish. That has to be re-edited. So I would go in and take out the portion that was incorrect.
Audio files, artwork, narrative, gameplay design. Diana's pulling it all together. And it's going from the creative teams to the developers, which is where you come back in, Anne Maria. Developers are the job that jump to mind when people think about gaming. But what is it really like?
A combination of fun and frustrating. So when we first get the ideas, it sounds like, oh, we're going to make this thing. This is so great. And I sit down and start writing the code, and it never goes as easy as you think. We make two types of games. We make games that are done with Unity, that are 3D. And then we make 2D types that are easier to run on a phone, easier to run on like a Chromebook. And both of those types take a lot of programming. One of the things that we did with the 2D games is we tended to put more of those at the beginning. So you're in this 2D world, the classroom and the getting across the street and so forth to get to school. And that's more 2D. And then when you get into Aztec, you see more of the 3D games with things like running through the maze and getting the glyphs and things like that. One of the reasons we did the 2D games is they're often faster to do and therefore cheaper. But they're also really fun. People like to play them a lot. We've did one of those, for example, at the very beginning of Aztec, the story begins when you're getting ready to leave for school and you have to find all of your things in your room. And those types of search games are used over and over and over. In fact, we did it again in Aztec, where you're searching in the jungle and you meet a monkey.
And because the 2D games are easier to program and getting to run across multiple devices, that's also a plus. Whereas 3D games were not always as friendly in that regard.
The game putting the pyramid together. And so it's really cool. And it has this great sound. It's Smash. It all goes together and it's fun. And you're using your mouse to do it. And then you put it on the iPad because people would like it to run on the iPad as well. And you don't have a mouse and you didn't think of that part. So now you can't do it. So then somebody tests it and they come back and they say, hey, I'm stuck in the game. This screen is frozen. And it's because you have no mouse and you have no way to move those. And those sorts of things, you would think of all of it in advance, but you never do.
Then we did the game in 2 languages, which adds challenges of translation, as Diana hit on. But what about on the programming end?
It was not very difficult to write it once we just decided to do it. Adding every page, both audio and text, didn't take all that long. And when you click a button, it changes from Spanish to English or back again.
Archaeologists, the people who study ancient history.
Arqueólogos, la gente que estudian la historia antigua.
In maybe the last 3 minutes, we've talked about what is really months of programming effort. But one of the hardest parts, especially for developers, is often saying, okay, the game is ready to go. But you, me, and Diana are all in agreement about making sure that the game development process keeps moving forward to get games out.
There's always little things that can be fixed. In one of the platformer games, you've got Honduran fruit bats that are flying around. It'd be cool to have something you click on, it tells you about those bats. One thing I have learned is to test early and test often, and no matter how much you test, it's not enough. Once you move from your office, your studio where you're developing, into the wild, you find a lot of bugs that didn't pop up.
Which is why we have Danielle. Danielle leads our testing, which means we hand you the very first versions of the game to play through. And it's often, especially as we saw with Aztec, at that point, not even really playable.
When you have a new application or a new game coming up, there's a lot of bugs in the beginning. And one of the most common bugs is when you have a blocker bug, which is when the game freezes and you can't keep playing. So you have to be very detailed about it and tell the developers, and also attach some pictures so they can easily fix it.
With Aztec, we learned building a bilingual game comes with bilingual bugs. Anne Maria mentioned audio and text switches at the click of a button, but we found to make that look right on the page took some tweaking.
And we have to take a look at every part. I mean, we have the English part and the Spanish one, and generally the Spanish part, it's much longer than the English text. So we have to make sure that everything fits in the screen so you can see it clearly.
One of the cool things about your job is you really are the first person to see the release version of the game. It gets signed off at different levels, but you are the first person to play through that full final version.
You see the whole process while you're a beta tester. You see at the beginning a lot of bugs, and then you start seeing this whole product that it's ready to be launched, and you're really excited to put it in the market so you and everyone can download it.
Funny you should mention downloading, since Aztec Games Chapters 1 and 2 are available for download or playable on the web right now. And that is the story of how, with hundreds of thousands of dollars, over thousands of hours, and thousands of bug fixes, played now by tens of thousands of users, Aztec Games was made.
And that was a great video. I don't know about you as an avid gamer myself. It is always fascinating to see the process from the wireframe to the actual execution of the game. And we are here with a live Q&A with the CEO of 7th Generation Games, Maria Ortiz Burns, and, Maria Burns Ortiz, I'm getting that messed up, and a group of students from across the country. How are you doing today, Maria?
Great. So good to see you, and so good to be here with all you guys here from the classrooms and distance learners. So ready to roll.
That's great. And then we have a host of questions, and I believe that our first question is coming from Clayton.
Hey, Clayton.
Hi, my name is Clayton. I'm from 7th grade. And how long does it take to make a game?
Yeah, hey, Clayton. Yes. So how long does it take to make a game? That is actually a really good question. And the answer is it really varies, right? So we have games that have taken us, a year, 18 months, and then we have games that have taken us 4 months, and we've gotten faster. So with Aztec, the first chapter of Aztec took us about a year to create. The second chapter of Aztec, because we got faster and we're doing things like reusing the code and we don't have to create all brand new things from scratch, took us about 9 months. And right now we are working on the third chapter, and that'll take us about 7 months. And then that's because partly you get to a point where you can't get any faster, right? So we're learning, we're getting it quicker as we go. And then you reach a point where you can't get much faster than that. And you just keep turning games out on that. And so it also depends. We talked about the 2D and the 3D part in the video. And so some of it is, takes a little bit longer. So the 3D games are a little more intense. They take a little longer to do. And then the 2D parts, we can turn out a little quicker. Great question.
Thank you.
That was an excellent question, Clayton. I believe our next question is coming from Maddox. Maddox, what's your question?
Hi, I'm Maddox. I'm a 5th grader in Illinois, and my question is creating art for video games different from other art?
That's a really good question. And we get asked that a lot. I think a lot of people love the art part of making games. And so the answer is yes and no. So Stefan, who you saw in the video, is a traditional artist, and he does murals and sells paintings and does all of that stuff, but he also does digital art. And so some of it transitions over. They will tend to use like a tablet, kind of like an iPad to draw stuff. But at the same time, you have to be thinking about how can you make the characters move? How can you build out the art so that it works in that format? And so we'll have something called layers where, you've got a leg and an arm, and if you're drawing a picture normally, it's all just one flat picture. But when you're making it so it needs to be animated to move, you have to have those as separate layers. So artists who make game art are usually incredible artists, and they can do a lot of different art, but you do have to make some changes to make it digital in the first place, right? Because, how do you make it so it looks right on a computer? And then also to be able to animate it and to be able to adapt the scenes, you have to have that extra level of layering. So there's similarities and differences.
Thank you, Max, for a really, really great question. I believe our next question is coming from Tori. Tori, what's your question today?
My name is Tori. I'm a sister. How do you come up with ideas for a game?
How do we come up with ideas for a game, right? That is one of the questions we get asked all the time. And the ideas for a game come from lots of different places. So first of all, and we work with a lot of kids like you guys, right? And we say, what kinds of things would you like to see in a game? What do you find interesting? What do you think is fun? And then we also look at ways that we can take, because our games teach math, and put math in context, right? So, you end up in the Mayan Empire in Aztec games. How many years is it to get home, right? And so to make it so that there's a point to it, how many miles do you have to travel? All of these different things to figure out how that goes. And so we talk to kids and we say, what kinds of things do you think are interesting? We talk to teachers. We say, what kinds of things do you want your kids to be learning? And then we sit around and we think, what kinds of things, what ways can we integrate those into a game? And so we do a lot of brainstorming. And I think one of the things, it's not an easy challenge coming up with ideas, because there's lots and lots of ideas, but it's figuring out how to fit all those ideas together. And not only that, but how to pick which ideas that we get to do and which ideas don't make it. And so I think a lot of it is talking to people, then research. When we went to Belize, as you saw, we learned so many new things that we didn't know. And so all of those different things, they come from so many different places, and some ideas come from playing games, right? I look at games that we like or kids like, and then we pull from that too. So inspiration comes from everywhere.
That was a great answer. I guess, inspiration is just what the spark of life, and it makes sense that games come from that inspiration that life really brings to you. Thank you, Tori, for that question as well. And I believe our next question is coming from Daquan.
Hello, my name is Daquan. I'm a 7th grader, and my question is, what is your favorite part about making a game?
Yes, thank you. That is, I think about that a lot. And the reality is, my favorite part is, and you kind of got to see it actually happen in that video. We start with nothing, right? We have a blank sheet of paper. We have ideas, and we get to sit there and take all of those things and make them happen. Make them something that you get to hold in your hands. And so my favorite part is that process of taking something that existed only in my head, and then being able to watch that turn into something that actually exists, right? And that the coolest part to me is, when it exists and sometimes it looks exactly like I thought. And then sometimes I didn't imagine it would be like this, but this is so much cooler than I'd even imagined, right? To take this idea and watch it go to, these scribbles on paper, and then to, these rough kind of versions of games that are a little bit buggy, but they're getting there. And then to see that final version where it's polished and kids like you guys are playing them, I mean, that is so cool, because it only existed in my imagination to start. And now it's a real thing out there that people get to play. Yeah.
Yes.
Is Anne Marie your mom?
She is. Yep. We are a co-founder, mother and daughter team. It's a whole different kind of family business.
That was a great question. I believe our next question is coming from Ava.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm an 8th grader in Minnesota. My question is, how do you get people to know about your games?
So that is a real challenge, right? And it's one of those things, when we talked about how the game was made, we didn't get into some of the things that happened afterward, right? But there's a lot of different jobs at a video game company. And so there's all the jobs involved in the production, but then there is that point afterward about what happens. And then we have people on our team who work to make sure that lots of people know about what we're doing. We use things like social media and all of those things. We work really actively with schools to make sure that what we're doing works for them. And so some of it is, a lot of it is word of mouth. And then there's this whole other part of game design and video game studios, which is the marketing part and making sure that people know about what you do. Because it's really cool to make fun games that are cool that people want to play. But if nobody knows about them, then that's a whole challenge all in of itself. And so we actually have additional jobs within our company of people whose whole job it is to make sure that people know about the games. And then one of the cool things too is word of mouth is a big thing. So that is, if someone really likes our game, then they tell someone else and they tell someone else. And before you know it, we have a lot more people playing our game. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and we try and push it out as far as possible because, we're creating games to teach math, which is really important to us. And so we want to get them played by as many kids as we can. A great one.
Thank you, Ava. That was a really great question. We never think about, okay, so how do we let people know that the game even exists so that way you can play it? That's an awesome question. And I believe our last question is coming from Gary.
Hi, I'm Gary, and I'm a seventh grader. And what's the hardest part about making a game?
So the hardest part about making a game, I think, is that it's never done, right? It's never finished because you could always go back, and everybody on the team feels this way, right? I know Anna Maria talked a little bit about this, but artists, they could always make it a little better, a little bit more detail. When we're doing the story, we could always, make it a little bit stronger here, have another little adventure here. Developers always want to make it better. They always want to add a little bit more challenge, or we can add an extra level, or we could make it harder or easier here. And that's one of the really challenging things is, it will never be perfect. And I think you always want it to be a little bit better, but to know that this game is really cool and really fun and we need to put it out there, because if we keep working on it forever, then you guys never get a chance to play it. So for us, the real challenge is the hardest part, I think, is saying, okay, it's good enough. And that doesn't mean that it's, not very good. It just means we've got it as good as we're going to get it. And we want to get it played by kids. And one of the cool things about games now, especially as we're more digital, right? In the past, someone would put out a game, and if there was a bug or there was something, go and do a whole new release and a whole new version. But now with everything being very digital, it's cool because, even if we want to make an update, we do updates every, 6 months or so, and we can add some of these things. And so we can expand it. But the hardest part is knowing that there's always little things that could be better, but needing to put it out anyway, because otherwise no one's going to ever see it, because nothing will ever be perfect. But Anne Marie always says about games, done is better than perfect, because done games people get to play.
I like that. Done games are games that people get to play. I love that attitude. Well, this comes to the end of our Q&A portion. I want to thank first and foremost Clayton, Maddox, Toya, Daquan, Ava, and Gary for taking time out of their busy day to answer or ask us questions with regards to how this process really works. And secondly, I want to thank you, Maria, for really taking the time out. And first and foremost, you and Anna Maria and just Seventh Generation Games for really creating just great technology, great games, really to educate. And it's interesting because I've seen it since the beginning, and it's really great to see how much that Aztec Games and the other games you guys make have really flourished over the years. So it's really been an amazing journey.
Well, and I wanted to give credit to these kids because actually, as we build out Aztec Chapter 3, we are working with kids around the country. And these 6 not only were here to ask questions, but they're part of the kids who are giving their feedback, saying, I like these ideas, you should try these different things. And so I want to credit them because they're all aspiring or actually not just aspiring, they're working in game design right now, even as middle schoolers. So thanks to them as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all very much. And it's the end of our Q&A session for today.